Ever wondered how brutal our history really is? Buckle up, buttercups, because we're about to take a long, hard look at some of the darkest chapters of human civilization. From ancient power struggles to modern-day horrors, we'll be digging into the events that make you want to shower after just hearing about them. We're keeping it light with a touch of humor, but don't worry, we're serious about the facts. So get ready to be informed, horrified, and maybe even a little bit ashamed of what humanity is capable of. Now, you might think of ancient Greece as the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, those togas that always looked like a strong breeze away from a wardrobe malfunction. But trust me, these folks were hardcore. Take the Peloponnesian War, basically Athens versus Sparta in a death match for control of, well, everything. In 416 BC, the Athenians decided to teach the neutral island of Melos a lesson. And by lesson, I mean genocide. They showed up with their ships, looking like a high school bully at a bake sale, and gave the Melians a choice: surrender and be enslaved, or resist and die. The Melians, bless their cotton socks, chose to resist. You see, they actually believed in that whole freedom thing. They thought their neutrality meant something, that the Athenians wouldn't actually go full-on barbarian on them. Spoiler alert, they were wrong. The Athenians besieged Melos, and when the city finally fell, they did something that would even make a Roman emperor blush. They slaughtered all the men because, toxic masculinity and all that, and sold the women and children into slavery. It was a massacre that would make even the most jaded historian reach for a stiff drink and a copy of Chicken Soup for the grieving classicist's soul. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'd think humanity would have learned its lesson about, not being utterly horrific to each other. But alas, history has a nasty habit of proving that we as a species are terrible students. From 1913 to 1922, the Ottoman Empire, once a byword for power and sophistication, decided to solve its Greek problem. And by solve, I mean systematically exterminate. We're talking forced deportations, death marches, mass killings, the whole grim buffet of ethnic cleansing. Imagine being torn from your home, forced to walk for hundreds of miles in unimaginable conditions, all while knowing that death, if you're lucky, is just around the corner. Hundreds of thousands of Greeks, men, women, and children, were brutally murdered, their only crime being their ethnicity. It was a tragedy of epic proportions, yet one that remains largely forgotten, buried under the weight of other 20th century horrors. 1947, India gains independence from Britain, which you'd think would be cause for celebration, right? Well, hold on to your samosas, because it gets messy. Instead of one free India, we got two, India and Pakistan, divided along religious lines. What could possibly go wrong? Oh, just a little thing called one of the largest mass migrations in human history, accompanied by violence so horrific it would make even Gandhi reach for a strongly worded letter. Millions of Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs were suddenly on the wrong side of the newly drawn borders, and they were desperate to get to the right side. And when I say desperate, I mean willing to kill and die for it. Desperate. Neighbor turned on neighbor, friend turned on friend, all fueled by fear, hatred, and a whole lot of political maneuvering that would make Machiavelli look like a rank amateur. The death toll, estimates range from 200,000 to 2 million. Let that sink in for a moment. The Korean War, that forgotten war sandwiched between World War II and Vietnam. We remember it for its brutal winters, the mass units' antics, and the ever-present threat of nuclear annihilation. But beneath the geopolitical chess match, a human tragedy of unimaginable proportions was unfolding. Both sides, fueled by ideology and fear, committed atrocities that would make your stomach churn faster than a kimchi eating contest. Take the Bodo League massacre for example. South Korea, convinced that communists had infiltrated their midst, rounded up suspected leftists and sympathizers. And by rounded up, I mean executed without trial. Tens of thousands of people, many of whom were guilty of nothing more than being in the wrong place at the wrong time, were murdered by their own government. Let's talk about Guatemala, a country known for its stunning landscapes, vibrant culture, and a history so brutal it could make a Mayan death god wince. From the 1960s to the 1990s, the Guatemalan military, backed by the United States, waged a brutal campaign against its own indigenous Mayan population. Why? Well, it's complicated, but let's just say that Cold War paranoia, land rights, and good old-fashioned racism all played a part. The result? A genocide that claimed the lives of over 200,000 people. Villages were razed, women were raped, children were murdered, and entire communities were wiped off the map. It was a systematic attempt to erase a culture, a people, and a way of life. And the worst part? Many of the perpetrators are still alive today, walking free, their crimes unpunished. 1971. The world watched in horror as what was then East Pakistan fought for independence from West Pakistan. But amidst the political turmoil, a genocide was unfolding, one that would claim the lives of up to 3 million people. The Pakistani army, aided by local collaborators, unleashed a wave of violence against the Bengali population that can only be described as barbaric. Mass killings, torture, rape, and forced displacement became the norm. The world, preoccupied with the Cold War and its own internal problems, largely turned a blind eye. It was a tragedy of immense proportions, yet one that remains largely unknown, a shameful footnote in the annals of human history. The Belgian Congo, a land of lush rainforests, abundant resources, and a history so dark it could make even the most optimistic soul lose faith in humanity. Under the rule of King Leopold II of Belgium, the Congo became a byword for colonial brutality. Driven by greed and a staggering lack of basic human decency, Leopold's agents ran the Congo like a personal fiefdom, exploiting its resources and people with ruthless efficiency. Rubber quotas were met through amputation, ivory was extracted at the barrel of a gun, and millions of Congolese died from starvation, disease, and outright murder. It was a genocide of staggering proportions, fueled by European greed and a chilling disregard for human life. It began in 1915, amidst the chaos of World War I. The Ottoman Empire, fearing that its Armenian population was siding with Russia, embarked on a campaign of systematic extermination. Men, women, children, the elderly, the infirm, no one was spared the Ottomans' wrath. Hundreds of thousands were driven from their homes, forced to march across the Syrian desert to their deaths. Massacres were commonplace, and those who weren't killed outright often succumbed to starvation, disease, or exposure. It was a genocide that shocked the world, yet one that Turkey, to this day, refuses to fully acknowledge. When we think of genocide, we often think of the Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, the horrors of the 20th century. But genocide, sadly, is not a modern invention. In the early 20th century, long before the Nazis came to power, Germany, eager to prove itself as a colonial power, unleashed a campaign of unimaginable brutality against the Herero and Namakwa people of what is now Namibia. Fueled by racist ideology and a thirst for land and resources, German colonial forces systematically drove the Herero and Namakwa from their ancestral lands, massacring those who resisted and driving the survivors into the desert to die of thirst and starvation. It was a genocide that prefigured the horrors to come, a chilling reminder that the capacity for evil knows no national boundaries. We've journeyed through time, explored the darkest corners of human history, and now we arrive at one of the most horrific chapters of all, the Holodomor, Stalin's man-made famine in Soviet Ukraine. From 1932 to 1933, Stalin, that jolly fellow with a penchant for purges and paranoia, decided to teach Ukrainian peasants a lesson about collectivization. And by lesson, I mean starve them to death by the millions. Grain was confiscated, villages were blockaded, and people were left to die in the streets, their bodies slowly wasting away. Parents were forced to watch their children starve, driven to desperate acts just to survive another day. It was a genocide by any other name, a calculated act of cruelty that decimated the Ukrainian population and left scars that linger to this day. So, there you have it, a whirlwind tour of humanity's greatest hits, or perhaps more accurately, its greatest misses. While these events are dark, Remembering them helps ensure history does not repeat itself. By understanding the mistakes of the past, we can work towards a future where such atrocities are unthinkable. Don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts below. Stay informed, stay connected, and remember, the world may be a terrifying place, but at least we have each other, and hopefully, a good therapist.